welcome back. The Vaal Dam is being reduced to manageable levels. 2 more floodgates were shut on Saturday, and the dam's capacity has dropped from 120 to 113%. 8 sluice gates remaining open.
Well, the opening of the gates posed a major threat to communities on the banks of the Vaal River who were already dealing with substantial flooding. So to discuss the developments there, we are joined now by water expert Dr. Anthony Turton. Dr. Anthony, thank you so much for your time and a very good morning to you. Let's talk a little bit about this. I mean, I was very startled to hear that since 1994, we've lost about 25 gauging stations on the Vaal River. How significant is that loss? And maybe we can even touch base on what exactly is the function of these gauging stations.
Yes, good morning to you and the listeners. That's not 25% gauging stations, that's 25% of gauging stations across the entire country.
Sheesh.
25% of hundreds of gauging stations. So it's a big number. And what gauging stations do, they are electronic instruments that are located at strategic points along all of our rivers in the country. And their task is to capture data and to send it up through telephone links, etc., and up to satellite links so that they can be processed in order to give real-time information, also early warning about flood events, etc.
Doctor, I'm hoping that I'm off the mark here, but experience has taught me that if anything falls apart or stops operating, it's because it has not been properly maintained. Would I be close to the truth by saying that?
Look, I think it's, the society wants to blame somebody for something. And I think in this context, we have to understand that there's very, very deep experience in the management of the integrated Vaal system. This has been institutionalized. It's not very easy for an individual person to break away from procedure. So the system itself is safe. It's generally well managed, but of course there's all kinds of credibility issues with the department. There are all sorts of capacity issues, etc. But I think in this case we must believe that the Vaal management system is safe, it's sound. The design of the system is robust, it's well tested. The reason why they have to release some water is simply because they can't keep it 100% above capacity, because then it becomes dangerous in a different way. Now, if the dam should fail, then it becomes an even bigger danger. So, yes, we've lost a lot of capacity. That 25% capacity I referred to happened in 1 year. In 1994, we lost 25% of all of the gauging stations in the country. They've never been replaced. And in fact, we've gone back now to the levels of kind of technical acumen that we had in about the 1930s, 1940s. We've gone backwards to that now. But still, the systems are in place and the people know what they're doing. In the case of dam management, it is done by a process known as dam management rules. So it's a rules-based decision-making process. And those rules are strictly applied because there's all kinds of legal liability that flows from those decisions that are made. So I think it's under control. I think the public mustn't be overly concerned about this particular matter. There are other issues to be concerned about, but I think the safety of the dam is not one.
Yeah, I want us to veer away a little bit from the safety of the dam, Dr. Anthony, and focus really about how data is captured in this country. We're supposed to be a country that is forging ahead with 4IR being ahead of the rest. But by even in 1 year, having 25 gauging stations fail, then it says something about data capturing or closing down of these data stations. When does data get captured? How does data get captured? And if data is captured in the way that they used to do it in the 1930s, I mean, would they not then in the 1930s choose to throw a stone just to gauge how deep a water level is? And what does it say about our ability to capture data on real time accurately and therefore be able to forecast and foretell when something is about to happen, such as a flooding?
Yes, it's 25% of all gauging stations. It's not 25 stations that are closed down.
Yeah,
it's 25% of many of 25% that were shut down, and that happened in 1994, in 1 year. And that happened when the Computing Center for Water Ecosystem Research was shut down. It used to be based at the University of KZN, and that was shut down by a government decision. And that led, the unintended consequence of that was that data started becoming increasingly scarce within water affairs. And then consultants started actually harvesting data and selling it back to government and recycling it. So that actually opened up the floodgates of, you can almost say, the thin edge of the wedge, the early days of corruption within government. But nonetheless, we live today in a digital era, and it's now technically possible to gauge the level of water from satellites. You don't actually need to have instruments in the river anymore. You can do it by satellite. Whether South Africa is doing it or not, I don't know. Certainly, your advanced societies, in the rest of the world, they are using that kind of very sophisticated imagery. In fact, you need to look no further than Google Earth. And if you look at Google Earth and you put your cursor on a dam, it will tell you the exact depth of that dam or the exact height of that dam above sea level to within less than a meter of accuracy. I mean, that's extremely accurate instrumentation. That.
Doctor, we've mentioned since this Vaal Dam tragedy that 12 sluice gates have been opened. Every time we've beat that drum about the 12 sluice gates being opened. Now, for the ordinary citizen that potentially doesn't understand what exactly that means, and when you say that had to be the case because the disaster could have been far worse, we could have been dealing with something completely different and completely worse. What exactly does that mean? Why was it that important to open those sluice gates if they were going to seemingly cause the problem we're dealing with now?
Okay, well, there are many layers to that question. So let's unpack those layers. Let's say there are two categories of issue we have to deal with here. The one category of issue is the safety of the dam itself. A dam is designed to hold a certain volume of water, which is measured basically as height above the base of the river. If it goes above that, it's still 113%. So it's still above the design capacity, but it's still being managed within safety levels. If you don't release that water, eventually the wall fails. And if the wall fails, you get a catastrophe much bigger than the one you're currently dealing with. So that brings us to the second point. And the second point is that everything downstream of a dam has now been rendered relatively safe because your flood peaks have been attenuated by the dam. However, that lulls people into a sense of safety and security, and they start building houses and infrastructure in the floodplain. This is the problem. Where people build within a floodplain defined as a 1 in 50 year or 1 in 100 year floodplain, that is no longer sufficient now because, firstly, has the law been enforced that prevents people from building in that floodplain? The answer is mostly no. And then the second thing now is, there's a technical question, is the 1 in 50 year floodline sufficient anymore? Because the kind of rainfall events we are getting at the moment are way, way, way bigger than that. So in other words, we have to start looking at more 1 in 100 year, maybe 1 in a 250 year floodline. Now that opens up a technical challenge that is of great, great, great complexity, because in effect, it means that many, many structures that have now been built, even legally above the 1 in 50 year floodline, they were also potentially at risk. So this is one of the consequences of a changing climate, one of the consequences of changing rainfall patterns. And this is one of the things that has to ultimately be dealt with by a highly technically competent bureaucracy. And that's what we don't have at the moment. We don't have the technical acumen in the bureaucracy anymore. And we are increasingly going to start feeling that because we are getting into areas of complexity now that are way beyond the norm.
Then, Dr. Anthony, why is it that we don't have the sluice gates open prior to the 100% or 113% capacity being reached? Would it be unwise or would it be unsafe to release it? Let's say if the dam level is at about 80% capacity, and if you're forecasting that for the next 5-6 days or so you're going to have and experience heavy rainfall, let's open up the sluice gates, just decrease the water levels for a little bit so that you're able then to gain more instead of opening it up when it's more fuller. Is there a way of doing that? Or is there a technicality that allows for that?
Yes, there are ways of doing that, but I mentioned earlier on that the dams are management by a set of rules. It's a rules-based decision-making process. So what do I mean by that? There are two broad categories of dams. There are more, but for argument's sake, let's just say there are two categories. The one category is a flood attenuation dam. Now, in a flood attenuation dam, you want to keep the dam empty because the purpose of the dam is to catch the flood before it becomes a problem. So the dam operating rules for a flood attenuation dam are to keep the dam empty. However, Vaal Dam is not like that. Vaal Dam is a water security dam. It's designed to provide the water security for Gauteng, which generates about 60% of the economic activity of South Africa. So it's extremely important, that dam. It's probably the most important dam in the country. So therefore, the objective of managing that dam is to keep it as full as possible, not to create space for incoming floods. So it's very difficult to change the design of a dam ex post facto after it's happened. And this is where we get into the modern world now, of artificial intelligence and this highly connected world, the Internet of Things and stuff like that. There are technologies that are available out there. There's no question of doubt that this is available. For some reason, our government tends to be reluctant. They talk about this stuff, but they don't actually want to implement it for various reasons. And I think this is this current tragedy playing out now is a case in point. We need to start implementing all of those integrated management systems, sensor-based artificial intelligence, machine learning. I mean, for example, I'm a director of a company that does this kind of stuff. We do, and I'm not trying to punt our technologies here, but I'll just give you an example. We are able to predict the stability of very complex industrial processes with about a 95% accuracy 2 hours in advance. So we can tell with 2 hours in advance if something's going to fail or if something's going to change. Now, if that can be done in an industrial process, then we can certainly do that also in a natural river environment. So I think the technology certainly exists out there. It's a question of time, and I think we're going to play catch up. But ultimately, this is going to be implemented. I've got no doubt about it. When, I don't know.
Just before we let you go, Dr. Anthony, you touched on an important point that at this point we're dealing with one of, if not the most important dam in South Africa. But then you also mentioned that this is not a dam that's supposed to be operating as a flood catcher, and it's now unfortunately being forced to do so. For purposes of general knowledge, which major dams around the country actually do operate in such a manner? And are they doing so efficiently?
We generally don't have flood attenuation dams in South Africa because our problem in South Africa is predominantly one of drought and water scarcity. So you can say almost as a general statement that all of our dams, or the majority of our dams, are in fact designed for water security. You find flood attenuation dams in places like Spain, in parts of America, etc., where flooding is a significant damage. There's a need in South Africa, for example, in Ladysmith, which is prone to flooding on a regular basis. Then there would be a place where you could build a flood attenuation dam. It's never ever been built, and Ladysmith is just persistently exposed to flood risk. So this is just the nature of the beast we're dealing with. And I think in a changing climate, this is the kind of issue that starts raising its head now. I spoke just now very glibly about a 1 in 50 year and a 1 in 100 year event. Let me just explain what that means. Rainfall does not fall constantly over time. Rainfall comes in bursts, it comes in events. And it's the clustering of these events and the volume of rain that falls through over a given period of time that matters. So, for example, if you take the city of Johannesburg or any of our major cities in South Africa, all of the culverts, all of the drains, all of the bridges going over, all of the low water bridges going over little sluice and streams, etc., they all designed to withstand a certain flood peak. But now that flood peak is changing, and we see, for example, in Pretoria, the Arpies River, for example, is now forever flooded. These are all examples now. Alexandra Township area, these are also perpetually flooded. These are simply artifacts of the fact that the old floodline planning is no longer valid. But now the problem is that people have been allowed to build houses and infrastructure has been built there. So when you're going to start moving those people, now you start going to forced removal scenario, which in South Africa is a politically charged issue. And then who's going to compensate those people for their loss of livelihoods and loss of property, etc.? So in other words, that all of this that I'm speaking to now comes back to one very simple thing. That is town planning or long-term strategic forecasting on which regional planning and the proper design of cities and infrastructure is based. This is where we've lost the plot in South Africa. We've lost our technical capacity to do that kind of thing. It's not considered to be fashionable or important. But this, of course, is what we are increasingly going to feel. And in fact, the conversation we're having now, we'll have the same conversation next year and the same conversation the year after. because we're going to find more and more people settling in these floodplains. And unless we apply the law without fear or favor, all that happens is more and more people are eventually exposed to risk. So we've got to bite the bullet at some point in time, and we've got to say the law is there to protect people. We must apply that law. And when that law means that we have to change the design of a bridge, we have to do that, but we also have to maintain it. How many bridges do you know of when you travel to work in the morning, when you see all the rubble and old tires and trees and all this sort of stuff that blocks the culvert of a bridge? It happens all over the show. So that routine maintenance is something that we also have to get that culture of maintenance back in South Africa. And with it, I could be speaking about Eskom now. It's exactly the same thing that's happening in the water sector space.
Yeah, Dr. Anthony, it certainly is a conversation regarding how do we adequately plan for the future of this country, and what do we need to put in place as a technicality and a maintenance and operational mandate to allow for this plan to actually be implemented. Unfortunately, South Africa falls short significantly when it comes to the adequate planning. We'll leave it there for now, but much appreciated for your time. As always, I felt like I was in school a little bit there with Dr. Anthony, just informing us about exactly how is it that dam levels work, and more than anything else about the closing of the 25% of gauge stations in 1994, just one time alone. Then we had 25 actually closed, and we never actually saw any of them reopening. More than anything, planning in the country, that's what it's needed.